gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Confusion slips quietly, like fog on a familiar road, blurring what once felt certain. You keep moving from habit rather than clarity, mistaking motion for progress. Beneath it all, a restless pull remains, urging you to pay attention. Awakenings start when you admit you're lost and stop running from it. In the quiet, buried questions surface, not to shame you, but to guide you. Clarity arrives in fragments, each honest insight reshaping your perspective. As you move forward, the world sharpens and your choices gain intention. You learn confusion was not failure, but a necessary crossing point. Looking back, you don't curse the fog, you respect what it taught you. I'm Kevin Donaldson, always here with Mike Felice, and welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's what we do here, and that's the stories that we highlight. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, ring the bell so you can get notified of all of our new content, and now you can join. And of course, follow us on all social media so you can find out what we're up to when we're up to it. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we welcome Danny Cohen, an acquaintance that I made. His story is something that we've never touched on this podcast, but it's a story that affects so many different people across the world that I believe that it was important, because what your father went through with dementia, what happens to these people is they sort of just die a little bit every single day. So, Danny, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to getting in this because, you know, I don't know anybody, especially in my life, that hasn't been touched in one form or fashion by dementia. But you had this chance happening with your father that is actually really, really beautiful, and I can't wait to get started with it.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience.
Before we get into anything, let's throw a big shout out to our marquee sponsor. That's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as police. We certainly don't trust anybody as podcasters, but we do trust the guys over at Toyota Hackensack. So if you're looking for a car, go to toyotahackensack.com. Let them find you a car, but also don't forget to tell them the Suffering Podcast sent you. So, Danny, each week we take a question from our audience. This question comes from Crunchy Nerf Herder. And I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I had to pull this one. But it's a great question. You know,
who doesn't want to answer a question from Crunchy Nerf Herder?
Crunchy Nerf Herder. I love it. I might steal that for my Instagram handle. So Crunchy Nerf Herder writes, what lie are you still telling yourself? You know, we look at ourselves in the mirror every single day, and somehow we are able to convince ourselves that certain things are true. And to the rest of the world, everybody knows that they're lies, but somehow in our mind, we're able just to do it. So what lie are you telling yourself or what lie are you still telling yourself?
Wow, that's a very great question, deeper than I thought. You know what the lie I think I'm probably telling myself is that I'm still going to be a big success in life, that I'm still going to hit it big. So I've been an entrepreneur before I got into writing a book and doing a podcast, and I had a business, and we had a good modicum of success, and we sold the business a number of years ago, and I've been on a mission to repeat that success. And a part of me, even with the book and the podcast, thinks, you know, would love to be a best-selling author or be very successful with podcast, but that's probably not true. And I think I should just accept that I want to get my message out there and share it with the world. And I may not be a tremendous success with it in terms of making a lot of money, but I can be successful with it in other ways. So I don't know if that's a lie, but...
My oldest boy brought something to my attention. So the guest dropped out or something, and he was 12 years old. And he came in. I said, Patrick, come on and sit in the studio. And the question, I can't remember the exact question, but it was like, all these things that you want out of life, you know, how do you propose that you're going to get the drive to go do them? And he goes, I've learned, he wasn't prompted this. He said this out of from his own heart. And he says, I've learned to say the word yet. So whatever I want, I say I want to be a pro football player. Well, I'm not a pro football player yet. You're not a best-selling author yet. You know, and all those things on down the line. So that word yet, and it's from the mouth of babes.
Yeah.
It was an amazing piece of wisdom from a 12-year-old.
That's terrific. And, you know, my take on it even though I may never become a great success, that doesn't mean you stop trying.
Define success, like the things that I've been successful in my life, when I look back on them, it's the journey on how we got there. When Mike and I first started this podcast in my basement on audio only, it was so much fun. It was a journey, and we watched everything grow and watch everything blossom until we came in here and come in front of Andrew, and that journey. And I kind of miss those old days. I like where we are now, but I kind of miss those days.
Sure.
They were just a lot of fun. So I think for me, the lie I tell myself is on days when I'm not feeling 100%, I got something going on, I got things in the back of my head, I tell myself, oh, you're fine, you're okay. And that's a big lie, because I'm not. I got something going on in my life. My life's blowing up. There's some chaos. There's some trouble. There's things that are just being disrupted. And I'll look myself in the mirror and it's like, okay, you're fine. Don't worry about it. You're fine. I'm not. And, but I will convince myself I'm fine, and then I'll push forward and I'll figure it out. But what that does, that pushing forward, even though I'm not fine and I know I'm not fine, that pushing forward allows me to figure things out. And eventually that will become truth. But it's an initial lie I always tell myself, hey, Kevin, you're fine, but I'm not. Okay. I will be fine. I should change that to say, instead of just looking in the mirror and saying I'm fine, I should change that to say, Kevin, you will be fine. All right. And then it will no longer be a lie, because it'll be the truth.
And this is something I touch upon in the book, and we'll get into it. It's accepting and acceptance. You got to accept that on that day you're not fine, but you will be fine. That's a different way of looking at it, rather than saying when you're not good, I am good. Yeah. It's accepting you're not and pushing forward. There's
a thing too where if I were just to say, yeah, I'm not fine, it's almost like accepting defeat. And I just refuse to accept defeat. So Crunchy Nerf Herder, thank you for sending your questions in. Keep sending in your questions. We'll try to get them on the air. So Danny, I don't even know where you came from. Where'd you come in from?
I came in from Long Island.
Okay.
Yeah, but I lived in Jersey for 25 years in central New Jersey.
You might want to move back to Jersey. The real estate's hopping in New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, Marlborough and Manalapan I was in.
Okay.
And,
nice area.
Yeah, I raised my kids there, but I grew up in Brooklyn. I lived in Long Island, had various different businesses and things, and now I'm back in Long Island.
Did you ever go to L'Amour's when you were in Brooklyn?
No.
The rock club? Do you know what I'm talking about, L'Amour's?
That one
what years?
We used to go out to Long Island for the club.
His father owned L'Amour's.
Really?
It was the rock club of Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, Guns N' Roses played there the night Appetite for Destruction came out.
Really?
Yeah. It's a lot of heavy metal bands and stuff. Metallica played there. A bunch of big names played there.
Have you ever been to Peter Luger's?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's one of the great steakhouses in Brooklyn.
So Peter Luger's is not my favorite. Okay. I like it.
I should walk out of this podcast.
I like it, but it's not my favorite. My favorite steak was always, because I've had them. I've had steak all over. I'm a big steak guy. There's two steaks. There's Gaucho's, which I heard has changed, Gaucho's and Aruba, and then it was Don Pepe's, which used to be in Newark and Pine Brook. They were the prime porterhouse for Don Pepe. I would put that up against any steak in the world. And I've been to Morton's, Gallagher's, Spark. I've been to all these places. And I'm like, yeah, they're all right, but they're overpriced and they're a la carte, and I never really enjoyed it. But let me tell you what, Peter Luger's is good.
I'm a Peter Luger's fan, and my father, who will talk about that, he loved, wherever he went, he talked about Peter Luger's steak.
So you go to Fernandez's in Newark, which they cook it on a tile and butter. See, now I'm getting hungry. We can't go down this road. So why don't you tell me a little bit about, I know you grew up in Brooklyn, how you grew up.
So I grew up in a middle-income neighborhood in Brooklyn, down in Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn. I went to Abraham Lincoln High School. And what was great about when I grew up, there was lots of buildings. I grew up in a building complex called Warbassy. It was 5 buildings, 23 stories high, 3 sections. Across the street was Trump Village, which was owned by Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump.
Yeah.
And there was another development, Lunatic. So I grew up, there were a tremendous amount, kids all the time playing. I grew up in a time without cell phones.
What years are we talking about?
Oh, I'm a little old. I grew up in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and no cell phones, you went out, you came home when the street light came on. the ice cream came up, you yelled up to your mother, Mom, I need some. She would put it in tinfoil and throw it down. You know, in those days, we were going to the mall. 11 years old, we were taking the bus.
Yeah. My uncle lived in Brooklyn. He lived in the Polish section. And oddly enough, an Irishman in the Polish section who used to go into the bar and tell Polish jokes until he got into a fight. But that's what they did. Are you ready to enhance your skills and provide the best care to those who need it the most? I'm Kevin Donaldson.
I'm Sherry Alsop. Our trauma-informed training is here to help, and we've been traveling across the country delivering this essential need to departments and organizations of every size, shape, and makeup.
We come to you with on-site training so you don't have to worry about travel or scheduling conflicts.
This isn't just a class, it's an interactive experience. You'll learn directly from subject matter experts who teach from a victim's point of view, putting you in the shoes of those who have experienced trauma.
This approach allows you to understand trauma on a deeper level and to better serve the individuals you work with.
We'll guide you through new interview techniques that prioritize a victim-centered approach, ensuring safety and empathy in every conversation.
And for those of you in law enforcement or other fields, our training includes post-credits, giving you the extra added value and recognition for your commitment to professional growth.
We offer references upon request to show just how effective our training can be.
Don't miss the opportunity to improve your understanding of trauma and make a real difference in the lives of those you serve. Get in touch with us today by going to sherryalsop.com and let us bring trauma-informed training to your organization.
Together, we can make a lasting impact.
Brooklyn now, it was just this nice little neighborhood, you know, real true neighborhood where the fabric was there and people were close and tight. And then you saw it sort of decline. And now it's coming back and they're doing what's called gentrification,
Right.
which I don't know. I think that's a fancy term for trying to clean the place up. But it's a storied place. Like there's these places in Brooklyn that just everybody in the world has
That's
heard
right.
about. So tell me about growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s.
You know, so growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s was you had your friends, you went to school, and, you know, you got into some fights, although I wasn't a fighter. My father's generation were fighters. It's interesting. My parents grew up in Williamsburg, but before it became hip. But I loved growing up. The interesting thing is today, I have friends that I know 60 years, that I know since I'm 5 years old. And those friendships are more like family. I don't think kids have that today, you know, where you just go out and you play and you know each other intimately. And
There's too many helicopter parents, right? So
Yeah.
your parents knew the game growing up in Brooklyn or raising you in Brooklyn. They knew
Right.
the game. We can't keep a kid inside in an apartment. We just can't do that stuff. So you let them out, and it's a lot of trust. And I don't know whether I could raise my kids like that, you know, where I got to drive my kids everywhere.
right.
They want to go over to their friend's house, I got to drive. Nobody drove me anywhere.
Can I tell you a story? My son, I don't know, he was a teenager. He went together with his friends. 10 minutes later, he says, "Can I come home?" I said, "Why? You're just with your buddies." He says, "Can you pick me up?" I picked him up. He got on the computer. They're all playing Xbox from their homes with each other on the game. I said, "At your age, I was out playing ball 8 hours a day on the basketball court." You know, it's a whole different generation that they're on their video games and on their phones.
The phones are the big one, you know, and so they just put this thing in New Jersey. The governor just signed a bill before he left. Murphy signed it where he said no cell phones in schools. And I'm kind of torn at that. Okay. Here's why I'm torn at that. While I don't think a kid should be on their cell phone during the day, I do believe they should have their cell phones with them. Cell phones have been the saving grace when something awful happens in a school or a teacher acts inappropriately or does something inappropriate. You and I grew up in eras where they didn't have cell phones. Teachers got away with it. Think back to all the things that your teachers did to you. They would
Right.
be arrested.
That's right.
You know how many times I got hit with a ruler? Or a teacher told me I don't even want to say the word stupid. You know, they would get arrested. So in that respect, cell phones have done a lot of good. I understand they're a huge distraction. I don't think I could teach high school with these kids being on their phones and their heads down. So I'm kind of torn by it.
I understand the importance of it, but you don't have to know where they are every moment of the day. My parents didn't know where we were, and we survived. We somehow made it back home at the end of the day and had some independence.
Well,
And
there's
I
also
think
the bad things that come in from that because, you know, you did things growing up. I'm sure you did things growing up that you're thankful there was no cell phones.
Right.
Now these kids can't get away with anything because
No.
somebody's got their phone out. They can't get into a fight without somebody taping it, and that tape will get back to the school and they get in trouble. It's crazy. So in that way, they have it, you know, every generation says we had it so tough. Well, on this one, I think they have it a little tougher than we have it. And they're so used to it. They're so ingrained to this.
every generation brings different challenges, brings advances that are both positive and negative.
Because I'm sure your father said the same thing about your generation. Oh, you kids got it so easy.
You know what? My father grew up much tougher than my generation. I got a feeling that you were probably a lot tougher than I was growing up, just looking at you. But he and his brothers, and I talk about it in my book, they grew up, they got into a lot of fights growing up. That's
how you got respect.
Yeah, I got respect.
You know, you especially in the city, the minute you got disrespected, you just like went down the social scale.
Right. And that's my father. He was a fighter, and he had there's some interesting stories. I tell one in the book about him growing up in Williamsburg, if you want to hear it quickly. So when my father was 17, he got into a fight. It's like family lore, this story. But he grew up with 3 older brothers, and one tougher than the next. And so he grew up as like my father was a boxer in the Army. He was 26-0. But when he was 17 years old, he was like the protector of his friends. So they're going to shoot pool one day, and they're in the pool hall, and they're coming down a very narrow staircase, very narrow. And up the other way is some other 17-year-old kids, one in particular who's known to be the son of a connected guy. And so they're walking down, this guy's walking up, and he nudges into my father's friend Jerry, and he knocks into him, right? Because it's a narrow hallway. So my father said, "What'd you do that for?" He says, "Because I felt like it." Well, my father said, "Well, you shouldn't do that." So the guy took off his belt, grabbed it by the strap, took the strap, and he flung it as hard as he could so the buckle hit my father on the top of his head. My father said, and my father loved to make a short story long. He was a great storyteller. He said he never felt so much pain in his entire life, but he never got so angry. So he proceeded to kick the living crap out of this other young man. He beat him up bad where the guy needed medical attention. So,
but I bet you that guy never tried that with them again.
No, he never did. And the interesting thing is, 2 weeks later, my father's walking in the street, and the kid's coming the other way. And my father's walking. He doesn't know if he's going to get into an altercation, and he's getting his fists ready. And as he walks by, the guy just nods in acknowledgement, almost like he respected him for standing up for him.
Well, the antidote to any bully, there's only one antidote to a bully, and that's standing up to him. A bully doesn't want to go after somebody who stands up to them.
The battles we fight are hard and taxing on the soul. Fighting a battle that seems impossible to win. The stressful calls that give us wounds that cannot be seen.
These moments leave scars. They leave dents. Sometimes we just need to sit and talk over coffee.
Finding a moment of peace in the comfort of decompression with those whom you share difficulties. Sharing moments with those who are the only ones who understand. Our peace comes in the quiet moments we can share with our brothers and sisters.
It's just a moment to sit, listen, and let it out. We may be dented, but we are not broken. The Suffering Podcast, Dented Ace Coffee, was created to bring the peace to the protectors. Dented Ace Coffee is a tribute to my brother Mike Felice and all the others
who couldn't find their peace. 100% of the proceeds will go directly to Dent Development Project so that we can begin to repair the dents caused by suffering in veterans, first responders, and their families. The Suffering Podcast's Dented Ace Coffee. Get yours today by visiting thesufferingpodcast.com.
Years later, my father loved to read about war stories in World War II, and he loved to read about stories about organized crime. So he read a book about the top 10 hitmen in America. The guy he beat up was on the list.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. See, my biggest brush with a hitman is the guy who prosecuted the Iceman lived in my town.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and I used to pick his brain about it all the time. It was fascinating to me. But so, why don't you tell us a little bit about your father? What was his name?
His name was Harvey. And the interesting thing is, so one of my chapters in my book is how to handle a bully. So, and my father passed on that lesson to his children when my brother got into an altercation, but he knew when to fight and when to not fight. So he grew up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and he never went to college, so he was more of a street guy. But he was very bright, and he took his street smarts and he built it into a successful business. He was in the he was a great salesman. You know, I like to think he was one of the world's greatest salesmen, but he was an innovative. He started these companies selling products over the phone that were only sold in person, like chemicals and lightings, and he was very good at the pitches and the things. So he, in a sense, revolutionized telemarketing. But he was a very warm and loving man with a big personality. So he was friendly. He commanded a room, but above everything else, he loved his wife and his children. That was the great loves of his life. And his lessons to us were two things that you would think be in conflict, but they weren't. One was, as long as you do your best, it's okay. And two, you could do whatever you set your mind to. So if you think about it, if your best isn't that good, you may not get what you accomplished, but they really did go hand in hand. And he lived his life, you know, loving his children. And part of that was because of the background he grew up in. He grew up in a situation where his parents weren't demonstratively loving. He was particularly close to one of his brothers that he slept in a bed with, who was 10 years older than my Uncle Benny, who there's also stories about in the book. And my grandmother used to say to my uncle, "You're a moron like your father." So my father grew up hearing that. The interesting thing that he did as a young man, which wasn't heard at the time, he got therapy at a very young age.
Wow. Tough guy getting therapy. That's unheard of.
At 20 years old. And he had this therapist throughout a lot of his life. And it helped him to overcome those demons. And because of that, he became very demonstratively loving to his family. He's so like this guy that he did a plaque of all the guy's sayings that he gave to him, and some interesting phrases.
When people grow up the way your father did, there's two ways it goes. It's either they continue the generational curse or they break those chains of those generational curses. I like to think that I broke the generational chains of that I grew up with, because my kids don't know the same things, and I don't want them to know.
Right.
But there's downsides to that stuff too, because if good time or hard times create hard men create good times create soft men create bad times. So there's a butter zone in there. I've watched parents. You watch this a lot with first generation immigrants. First generation immigrants traditionally will come here and they'll bust their ass. Italians were the bricklayers, Irish were the cops, and so forth and so on. And then you watch the second generation, like the second generation Italians. They didn't want their kids to be bricklayers. They sent them to college. Okay, well, They went to college for whatever, and they become softer, right? And then they're fighting for jobs that aren't really out there. But guess what jobs are available, and they pay really well? Bricklayer,
Yeah.
Most of the jobs that you go to college for are becoming automated, or AI's taking over them. They haven't figured out a way to do that through AI, how to lay bricks.
No, that's very true. And his parents were immigrants. They came from Russia and Poland. And the interesting thing is my mother was the opposite. She was the educated one. She went to college, or she went at night for 10 years. She ended up becoming a teacher. But she also came from a home where they were not demonstratively loving her parents. And his being so loving rubbed off on my mother. And her goals of education rubbed up. That's why it was very important that we go on to college and do other things. But you're right. My generation was not as tough as my father's generation. But my father taught those lessons. So there's a great story that involved my brother. I'll tell you quickly, too. So my brother was 16 in the neighborhood. He's going out on his first date outside the neighborhood. And he comes back from the neighborhood, and these two kids jump him. Why did they jump him? I don't know. Maybe he was one of the smart kids. They thought he was weaker. Two of these kids jumped him. One put a knife to his throat. He was able to escape, run away. Now, remember, we lived in 23-story buildings, different sections. He ran up the C section to the roof, ran across the roof, ran down the stairs to the 14th floor where we were, got into the apartment, and immediately told my father that he was attacked. So you think my father says, it's okay, we'll figure it out, don't worry, I'll talk to the parents tomorrow. No, my father says, right now, you're going to go downstairs, you're going to find each of these guys, and you're going to kick the crap out of them. Not tomorrow, not the day after. You got to know that they can't do anything to you. So my brother went from being terrified to all of a sudden being emboldened. He goes downstairs. He finds one guy who put the knife to him. The other guy had disappeared. And he proceeds to really get in a good beating on the guy, right? All of a sudden, the neighborhood tough guy, this was a kid that was in karate, was a karate guy. He was like 3 years old and 19. They were 16. He comes into nowhere to help his friend that my brother was fighting. And the guy forms the karate stance. Out of nowhere, my father jumps out of the shadows, takes a boxing stand, and says to the kid, I'm not going to kick your ass. You're going to go upstairs, get your father, bring him downstairs, and I'm going to kick his ass.
Well, yeah, because, you know, your father, so most parents, are you a father?
Yes.
You're a father. So
yeah.
We let our kids out on this tether line, right? When they're young, the tether line's real short. As they get older, we sort of let it out. And every once in a while, you got to yank that tether line because you want to give them space, but you also want to still protect them a little bit. So that's what your father was doing, and that's old school stuff, right? He don't fight kids, he fights adults.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my sister, so it's interesting, this was his son. My sister moved out when she was older. She moved to part of Brooklyn. And one day, they were on the second floor. One day, someone climbed up to the second floor and stole her pocketbook. She calls my father. So you'd think my father would say, hey, we're not going to run scared. I'll talk to the lawyer, not the lawyer, the landlord. We'll have him put bars on the wood. We're not going to run scared. That's not what my father did. Before the night was over, he had my sister packed up. He had her moved out of the place, right? This was his little girl. He was going to protect her. He knew when to fight and when not to fight. And then people say, well, what happened? Did you have to pay for the lease? So we never knew what happened. But my guess is when he got done with the landlord was paying him. But the lesson is you have to know when it's appropriate to fight and when it's appropriate to not fight. And that's one of the things he knew.
You were in Brooklyn in 1977?
Yeah, I was.
So with the .44 caliber killer, obviously
Son of Sam.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I lived right near Bay 8th Street, which was one of the, off the Bell Park. That was probably 5 minutes from there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, you know, I watched, I was way too young to remember that, and I wasn't in Brooklyn, but I've watched enough stuff on it it's an interesting case that I don't think they got right, but that's my opinion. So your father, he was a chemical engineer, tough guy, street guy.
No, sold chemicals.
He sold chemicals.
Yeah.
Sold chemicals, tough guy, street guy.
But a loving man.
But a loving man.
Exuded love.
He had, it looked like he was this well-rounded person. But when you were a little kid and you looked at your father, Some people look at their fathers as villains. Others look at them as heroes. Depends on what age you are, I guess. I mean, what was your view of your father as a little kid?
I always looked at my father as my hero till the day he died. That's where it was. And he wasn't perfect. He certainly had his mistakes. He was far from a perfect man, but he was the one for me in life. And I also write about it in the book that I think you're never too old to have the one in your life that you love. And the interesting thing is, my brother, my sister, they felt the same way. I used to say to myself, how could anybody else in this world have the kind of relationship I had with my father? It's impossible. But we had a 75th birthday party for him. And from my mother down to the youngest grandchild, they all spoke to my father. And the level of love for this man was really amazing. We all viewed him, flawed, but as a hero. Like my brother is a doctor, so he became like the problem solver for the family, especially in medical issues. But when he needed advice, my father was that man for him too.
Who else are you going to trust?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So I always looked at him like that. Even through the throes of dementia, that never changed for me. And I think that you're never too old to have, I call it the one in your life. It's like I saw Tom Brady being interviewed, and a young man said to him, "Who's your hero?"
Yeah.
And he teared up and he talked about his father.
The inevitability of life is that we watch these people, we see our heroes growing up, but we live long enough to watch them age, and we watch them start to do the inevitable decline. As somebody gets older, their mobility goes away, their energy goes away, their ability to do this or that. And we watch these people who we saw as so strong start to crumble a little bit. And it's an inevitability that's coming for us all, but it's still very hard to watch. So you move on in your life. Your father's always there giving you advice, giving you counsel, giving you the best counsel that he could. At what age did you notice it's like, wow, my dad's getting old?
You know, it really wasn't until he had his stroke.
Which is what year?
He had his stroke in 2005 when he was 75 years old. I never viewed him as getting old, even though he was getting old at that point. My father loved to go to the track. So we went a lot to the track, and I took him with my kids to the track. And he didn't like the thoroughbreds. He liked the trotters. And for people that don't know, that's where you sit. They sit on a cart and they drive a horse. And when we used to go to the track, especially, we used to go to Freehold Raceway down in Jersey. There's a lot of old men there, right? And I never looked at him as old like those men. For some reason, to me, he was always younger and hipper than those guys.
Well, think about this. How old are you now, Danny?
I am 66, but don't look at Kevin, right?
No, you do not. You got a lot less wrinkles, and I'm only 51. So think about this. You're 66 years old. Go back to your 15-year-old self. How would you look at a 66-year-old? You were ancient.
Ancient.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, ancient. That's true. When you look back at family pictures, like if you see your grandparents at 60, they look like they were 90.
Yeah.
Even my parents at my age looked much older. I don't know if it's a generational thing. You know, I still feel young. I don't know if my kids are older than yours. My kids are in their 30s. I just became a grandfather. But I don't know how hip I am to my children, even though I think I'm still pretty cool.
At 15, a 51-year-old was old, right? And now at 51, I'm like, yeah, 51's not that old.
No.
I don't think that's that bad. It's no big deal.
You got half your life to go at 50. I don't feel old.
I am
66.
not living to 102. I played college football. There's no way I'm making it that long. But you got to look at it through a kid's eyes, how you are today. And while up here I'm still 20. I'm still, on some things, I'm still 5 years old.
Right.
I don't feel old up here until I wake up in the morning and I'm a little sore from doing whatever. But, age is a state of a mind to a certain extent. Obviously your body starts to give out.
Right.
No matter how young your mind is, your body is going to fail you. So your father has this stroke in 2004, did you say?
Five.
2005.
Right.
And you watch this strong, vibrant man who you never saw as old almost
Die.
get old overnight and almost pass away.
It's true. The interesting thing is he was on blood thinners for whatever reason. My brother's a doctor. He threw up that morning. They walked into his office, and they literally knew he was having a stroke. He couldn't smile. His face was drooping. Within 10 minutes, they had him in the hospital, and they drained the blood from his head. So it literally saved his life because
that's the thing with strokes. So strokes, the sooner you get oxygen on somebody with a stroke, the better chance they have at a full recovery.
You saw this man that worshipped all of a sudden was human, and then
Superman has his kryptonite.
Yeah, exactly. And he had a very good recovery in the beginning. He was never really fully himself, but he was able to drive a car.
He's fortunate than most.
Yeah, for a couple of years he was pretty good. But the stroke led to dementia, and that was really the
So
downfall.
what's the first sign that you see that your father is something's off? Something's off where he's forgetting things.
Yeah, well,
it's not an event. That's the worst part about dementia. If you have a heart attack, that's an event. You have a stroke, that's an event. Dementia is like this gradual decline that every single little day they lose a little piece of themselves.
medically speaking, dementia runs in stages from moderate to severe, okay? And my advice to people that are going through it is don't study the stages. It's just going to cause you more angst and grief. You know what your loved one is going through. But in the beginning, it's they can't get words out,
They're searching. They're just like,
They're searching. They can't remember names. The first thing that really goes is short-term memory,
But long term, so that I dealt with dementia with my grandmother. Probably started hitting her. She was older. Probably started hitting her around 90, and it just started slipping away. But what I would do is I would bring her old pictures of her uncles and stuff. We're talking World War I pictures.
Right.
And all these different old pictures, and she knew every single one of them. And these people have been dead for 40 years.
It's an incredible thing what the mind is, especially with dementia. The long-term memory, for whatever reason, stays intact. The short-term memory really goes.
But
and it's
in that same meeting I was telling you about with the pictures, she thought I was my father.
right.
Okay, I was my father, and my son was me.
Right.
So it's just this weird thing where, you have to be patient. So I think the key to dementia is patience, knowing that they don't want this to happen. They may even realize that this is happening, that he can't remember certain things. And it's a sad thing to watch. Dementia and dementia itself doesn't kill people. Alzheimer's kills people, and dementia doesn't. So the
Well,
pain.
let me just clarify that for you, because a lot of people don't know the difference between Alzheimer's and dementias. Dementia, so you could get dementia from a number. Alzheimer's is a buildup of plaque in the brain. Dementia is the symptoms. You could get dementia from a stroke or a blow to the head. You can get it from certain illnesses, certain diseases. There's, people used to talk about senility. That's vascular dementia. So dementia and Alzheimer's, dementia is the symptoms from Alzheimer's.
We're the only country in the world that calls it Alzheimer's.
No, what do
They call it type 3 diabetes.
Really?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
You go to Europe, they won't know what Alzheimer's is. They'll know what type 3 diabetes is because it has to do a lot with your blood glucose.
Right.
But you watch this happen over a period of time. When you saw your father start to search for those words, those first little signs they peek through, when did it become a concern to you where you actually took him for medical attention?
Well, again, we had an advantage because my brother was a doctor, okay? And my brother, because he loved my father like that, he's so obsessed as to the symptoms of the stroke that he probably knew too much, okay? So once he started to exhibit these symptoms about losing words and short-term memory, we brought him to a neurologist who then diagnosed him with dementia.
Now,
You know.
you get that diagnosis, do you remember what the doctor said to you?
He has dementia.
Yeah, and your reaction to that?
I think my brother had prepped us that could happen. So, it's heartbreaking, especially this person that's so prevalent in your life. That's I call him the world's greatest problem solver. It's another chapter. But to me, he could solve every problem. Whether he could or not, it didn't matter. If I had a rough time, he would say 3 words, say, "Don't whip yourself." And that made me feel better. It was just saying that nothing is insurmountable. You got to head things head on, but no matter what happens, it's not the end of the world. But just hearing those words for him. So the interesting thing is when someone has dementia, it's almost like you're mourning that person while they're living. But what you said about patience is true. I use a different word, and I use acceptance. And this is what I try to tell people. And someone really told it to me when their mother went through it, and the mother was on their deathbed on a morphine drip. And she said, you got to accept. I'd rather have my mother on a morphine drip than dead, So you got to learn acceptance. And what happens with people, especially in the beginning, is for caregivers or family members, you get frustrated, right? You tell them the word they're searching for. You should have known it. Come on, Dad. You know this. You've said this a million times, right? Or they'll start repeating themselves. And the natural instinct is say, Dad, I just told you that. Don't you remember I just told you that? Or you should know this already. It's very easy as a caregiver to get frustrated. And that'll tear you apart more than anything else. The other thing is, as people go through the stages, someone will say, wow, wasn't he better 6 months ago? Or she was better 6 months ago. Why can't they be that today? And 6 months later, they're going to be worse. So,
but you look at a kid, the kid's the same. If you have a kid, try to potty train a kid and tell me you're not going to get frustrated.
Right.
Like, dude, I was just telling you a story myself. Like, dude, come on. Go to the bathroom on the toilet. Do what you got to do. Come on. You don't need to go in your diaper. You're a big boy now. Come on. And it's the same type of frustration that you get with these people. And it's sad, too, because this is a person who you saw as a hero who took care of you when you were a little kid. And you see this gradual decline to the point where they're like erased. They're gone. Or maybe they'll have a moment where they remember one thing and it's a victory. That's what you look forward to every single day. And it just whittles everything down and they become a shadow.
But I did something different there too. So when I say acceptance, it's not only accepting your loved one, whatever they're going through, but to give yourself grace and accept that you don't know all the answers. You're sometimes going to get frustrated. But the thing is, if you can meet your loved one where you're at and accept them for where you're at, then you're going to have less moments of frustration and angst. And if you don't do that, it's just going to not be good for you and not be good for your loved one. And I'll tell you a quick story. So this is before we got, more care for my father. My mother went to an aunt's 90th birthday party, I think, in Houston, and says, for 3 nights, you all got to watch your father, okay? So my brother and sister switched off. So next time we got together, we said, what did you do? So I said, I took Dad to a movie. My brother said, I took him to a movie. My sister took him to a movie. They said to me, Danny, what movie did you take him to? We took him to Argo. I don't know if you remember the movie with Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
It won the Academy Award. And we said, so my brother, what movie did you take him to? Argo. We looked at my sister and she goes, I took him to Argo too. Okay? We all broke out. We were hysterical. I got to tell you something. When I went home, I cried because we were not accepting my father for who he was. We were allowing him to be, because he didn't remember from day to day that he saw the movie. He might have enjoyed it in the moment, but we were letting him live in his own world. If we were accepting him for who he was, despite it, we each would have taken him to 3 different movies. So, I want to treat the person, and I did, as if they're part of life, not that they're not part of life. So what I try to do is to, when they could, I would take both my parents, and I was in Jersey for a while, so it was a big trip, to a movie and lunch. And if it was a sad movie, you could see the tears in his eyes. He might not remember it 5 minutes later.
Oh, that's the best type of sadness, because sadness is a healthy emotion. But if you don't remember, like nobody wants to be sad all the time, but if you don't remember 5 minutes later, so there's certain blessings in disguise.
That's true.
That's true. You never want that person who is, especially in any type of cognitive decline, to have self-awareness, because when they have self-awareness, it actually is sad. They know stuff that's going on.
That's right.
I knew a guy that I can't remember what it was, but he couldn't move. Like everything locked up on him, and he couldn't speak, he couldn't move, but he was still alive in here. To me, that self-awareness, I can't even think about that, because it turns my stomach. Where dementia, it's gentle, it's kind, it's progressive, but it's slowly progressive, to the point where, was it ever a time when your father just disappeared?
So we were fortunate that towards the end, most of the time he still knew who we were. Okay, there are families where they don't. They don't recognize it. I don't know. That might have been really the worst thing I could have gone through. So he still recognized us for the most time, and sometimes he didn't. And at the end, when I would go there and see him, he would just hold my hand and kiss my hand. And that was enough for me, because the essence of who he was, a loving man, was showing there. So that's, again, acceptance of a situation, because he was far from where he was, but the essence of the man was who he was. But
so there was a moment where he awakens.
It was more than a moment. So there are people that they'll have, like if they don't remember who you are, they'll have to say your name, or they'll have moments of recognition. He had a full-blown awakening. So in the summer of 2015, he was really in the late stages. So he was basically not verbal, maybe a word or two. He was incontinent, so he was in Depends. He needed to be changed. He needed to be washed and cared for. A lot of times, dementia patients, they can get angry. He was amicable most of the time, but towards the end, when they would bathe him, he would scream out in pain. And he was in no pain. And it was very hard to hear your father screaming out like when he was in pain. So in the summer of 2015, he had pneumonia. And he had a very bad case of pneumonia. And then later, around Labor Day, he had a second case of pneumonia. And then my brother's practice was taking care of him, one of his partners. So they got him into the hospital. They loaded him up with steroids and antibiotics. And he had a 2-day awakening. Not just an acknowledgement of who we were, but he came back. He was like, I put in percentages, it was like 90% himself. My brother says the bar was so low and he came back so high that it was amazing. So for me, I walked in the room and he said, "Hi, Danny." And so just by rote, I said, "Hi, Dad." He says, "I love you very much." I said, "I love you too." He goes, "What happened to me?" I said, "You had pneumonia, you're having pneumonia, you're being treated, and you'll go home soon." And then it dawned on me that this was not the man I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. This was my father, the loving man that he was. But then I also thought maybe he was saying, where have I been these last 10 years? So it truly was remarkable.
When you sat and talked to him, did he have any recollection of the past few years when he had been in this cognitive decline?
Okay, that's another really great question, because we truly don't know what a dementia person thinks or knows, right?
Sure.
We have no way of knowing in their head. So my brother was giving him updates on all the grandchildren. This one got this job, this one got that job, and he was saying, "That's great, that's wonderful." And then he says to my brother, "Oh, your son David's in medical school." And he said, and another son started Ivy League school. That happened while he was in the midst of dementia. How could he know about it unless he absorbed more than you think when you're having dementia? So it was remarkable that he knew which hospital he was in. It was really remarkable. But some of the things we went through were really incredible. So my father was, I told you he was a fighter. I told you the story. He was an undefeated boxer in the Army. And he loved Muhammad Ali. And he asked about Muhammad Ali, and we told him about Muhammad Ali. And my father loved Wayne Corbett. You know Wayne Corbett on the Jets. My father was the biggest, most fanatical Jet fan you can believe. When they used to practice on Long Island, he used to go to the practices, right?
I do a lot of things with the Jets now.
You do.
I do.
And Wayne Corbett was undersized, right? Should never have made it. There's a story about the audition he had. He caught 150 passes. Loved Wayne Corbett, so much so that he put all the grandchildren, number 80 jerseys, and he put it on. So he says, "What's Wayne Corbett doing?" He goes, "I remember when we got all the grandkids in the 80 jersey." And I looked it up, and I told him what Wayne Corbett is saying. But my brother said to him, he was a welterweight, my father, but he was on the smaller side. He says, "Why were you a successful boxer?" He goes, "Because I was underestimated like Wayne Corbett," he said, "and I surprised my opponents." So it was really, really remarkable, some of the things. We're Jewish, so he wanted to know about Jewish athletes. He tells my mother at one point, they were married 62 years at the time, that she was the love of his life. I mean, it was remarkable.
That's beautiful.
She had the brunt of it every day. And the interesting thought about it, she lived with him every day, but she was the last to know what his condition was. I don't know why. We all recognized the decline
but maybe
faster than her.
It's kind of like you don't see your hair getting gray.
Right.
It just happens. Until one day you wake up and you're like, wow, it's there. But did you ever get a chance to ask him questions? Maybe, you had one last shot and you had an opportunity that most people, it's one of those scenarios that people talk about. It's like, who would you talk to if you had 5 minutes to talk to anybody living or dead? Because he basically resurrected himself and came back from the dead. And you now have this unique opportunity. You don't know how long this opportunity, you don't know how long this window is going to open up. So it's almost like, I always talk about my grandfather. My grandfather's the most important man in my life. What I wouldn't give to have 5 minutes sitting on a park bench with him, because there's questions I didn't get a chance to ask him because I was too young. I was only 22 when he died, that I would love to ask him as a 51-year-old man. But you now have that opportunity with your father.
So it's not like we had a thought about the profound questions we wanted to ask him, but it just happened in the conversation. But I just want to go back 1 second. So some interesting things had happened. My father had quirks growing up, right? So when he would sleep, he'd take a nap. He'd put a long sock across his eye. That's how he took a nap, right? So he hadn't done that for 10 years. He's lying in the hospital. He says to my mother, "Do you have my sock so I could take a nap?" The other thing is my father always, if he liked you and you didn't, he was always a very generous tipper, right? Says to my mother, "Got any cash so I could tip the nurses and the aides?" It was really incredible. But what was profound about it, my brother said, "Do you have anything you want to say to me at the moment?" And he says to my brother, "I'm very happy to have a son like you." My brother said it was one of the most seminal moments of his life. This man that he loved and admired and had been gone told him how proud he was to have a son like him. But did we ask him any questions that I was dying to ask him? No, we just enjoyed all the interactions we had with him. But so my kids were in their early 20s then. And I said, "I want you to see Grandpa because you haven't seen Grandpa like this." They were much younger when he had his stroke. And my son once said to me, "Boy, I wish I knew Grandpa as an adult," which they never really got to see the opportunity. So when they got there, he had already reverted back to his dementia. But my brother videotaped some of the conversation towards the end when he was already starting to revert back. And he said to my father, "What are you happy about?" And he said, "I'm happy just to be here and alive." And to me, that was extremely profound because I think my father was a fighter his whole life. And he was really saying that even in the throes of dementia, I'm fighting to survive. I came back to tell my family how much I love them. And no matter what I'm going through, I'm still fighting to survive. But then I thought to myself, maybe there's even a more profound message here. Because again, we never know what a dementia person is going through. I think he was really saying that even in the throes of dementia, he still appreciated life and wanted to live. And that was the impetus for me to want to tell his story because I thought it could help a lot of other caregivers.
So how much longer did your father last before he finally moved on?
He lasted 8 more months. And we had him in long-term hospice. So some people have said to me, no, he went through what they called, you hear stories about people on their deathbed and they have they awaken for a short period of time. I forgot the technical term for it. And then they die a day later. That's not what happened. He literally lived another 8 months. And then we were searching for why this happened, right? So my brother, the doctor, says, well, they loaded him up with steroids, right? And the steroids must have reduced the inflammation of his brain, and he came back. And I said to myself, steroids? He goes, because when we have patients in the hospital, especially when they're dying, we don't know what to do. We load them up with steroids. It keeps them going. And I said, how can a progressive disease that only gets worse, can't go, how can it reverse itself? So I found that hard to believe. Then I said to myself, and I'm not a religious guy. Maybe it's a miracle, and to me, that was as logical an explanation as anything else. And we could pray that it happens again, but miracles don't happen twice. But the third reason was probably what I just mentioned, that I think he was sending a message to his family that he still had a desire to live and a fight to live.
There's so many different research. There's so much different research going out about dementia right now and Alzheimer's and things like that. And the new research is actually the most promising because it's not pharmaceutical based. It's dietary based.
Interesting.
So one of the things, was your father on a statin?
Yeah, he was on a statin. He was on, can imagine.
So statins, cholesterol brings nutrition up to your brain.
Right.
That's what brings your brain, makes us human. And also ketogenic blood will stave it off because it'll make your mind clearer. Glucose is not a good thing for somebody with dementia. Those statins, early onset dementia and brain fog, all those different things. So the new studies are all focusing on dietary changes to stave that stuff off.
Interesting.
And there's some really promising research being done right now. Harvard just did a research in 2022. I read a lot of those things because I'm very interested. My family is not Alzheimer's, but we're dementia. We're dementia and cancer, and dietary changes, certain dietary changes can stave off both of those. So, but your father ends up passing another 8. So we're 2016?
Right.
Yeah, it's 2016 exactly. He passes. But you had all this time. How old was he?
He was right before his 86th birthday.
So 86 years, you had 85 years of, well, you didn't personally, but he had 85 years. He did his part. He lived a good life. If you had to think about something that you're grateful for your father, like what are you most grateful for? Was it that two-day awakening so you could just see him one last time, or was it when you grew up?
No, it was just the love he showed me growing up. Yeah. I mean, the 2 days was remarkable to have him back in that moment, but it was just the man he was.
Did it make it hurt more?
It didn't.
No?
No, exactly. The opposite. It was just incredible to see the man that was gone, literally gone, come back seemingly overnight. So it was just a remarkable experience that I cherished. I did. And because of that, so I wrote a book that I released a month ago. But while he was still alive, I wrote an article. I don't know if you're familiar with medium.com. It's for like writers. And I said, I've always liked to write. So I said, I'm going to write and share this story. And it's almost like, did you see the movie called Awakenings with Robin Williams, where he treats catatonic patients?
Robert De Niro.
Yeah, Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. So I actually wrote it in a site that was a movie site. So I almost compared what we had as a mini awakening. And I shared the story, and then because I like to write, and to this day, I get more views than I did when I wrote it 10 years ago. It's about 335,000 views. And I got so many nice comments from people that were going through dementia and Alzheimer's that it gave them hope that their family members still wanted to live and still appreciated life. And they thanked me for writing it and the love I showed my father in the relationship. And I was really touched by that. And that made me feel good that that experience has really helped others.
So where can we get our book Awakenings so we can hear this entire story?
So Awakenings is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the various .coms. It's available in certain bookstores. I don't know the names offhand. But when I thought about writing a book, right, I said my father's story is not enough to just write a book. It's a great story, but it's not a full book. So I was thinking about what to do. And when I was reflecting back on what happened about, I was reflecting back on his life and my life growing up. And I was looking at it in a sense of that I experienced other mini awakenings in my life and other stories that I went through, not as dramatic as he went through. And I share those stories of my father growing up and me growing up and my family growing up, like the story when to choose to fight or when not to fight. There's stories about small acts of kindness. There's stories about when it's important to show up, and that happened to do with my uncle that was always there. It was sharing. I wrote a chapter, I call it a living eulogy for my father. And I wrote that you've been to people who passed, and you hear these, too many. You hear these most beautiful eulogies, right? And I said, and I cry whether I know the person or not, right? And I said, boy, the person who should be hearing about it is the person in the box. Isn't it a shame? You tell people, I'm sure, that you love them, they're a great friend, but have you really shared all the things you care about someone? So I called it the living eulogy. I said, and I had the opportunity, I wrote my parents a letter when I was 40 about how much I loved them. And we had that opportunity again at his 75th birthday party. Was just one of the reflections I had is share how you feel about not only your parents, your children, your loved ones, your good friends. Write them a note, do a small video, write them a letter. Just share your feelings with them. Don't wait till they're in the ground to share that story because people are really appreciate. So that's another thing that I reflected on. And the other thing I do in the book, I leave a reflection section. So I want the readers to become authors. So whether you're going through the care of a dementia patient, it could be someone with a physical disability or a mental disability, I give them certain prompts to reflect on certain things in their life. So I talk about memories, right? I could choose to remember my father the way he was at the end of his life, right? Or I could choose to remember him the way he was. Very different ways.
So if our audience wants to find you, you have social media that you want to give out?
Sure. So all my social media is Awakenings in Real Life. If anybody wants to email me, it's info@awakeningsinreallife.com. I'm on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, all those different sources. And I also do my own podcast. I don't know if you want me to
What's in it? It's about the name of your podcast.
It's also called Awakenings in Real Life.
Oh, you branded across all areas.
Branded, yeah. I'm a branding guy. So the interesting thing to me is I was watching something like one of these reports on TV, and there was a guy who had a spinal condition, and he decided he's going to leave his life, learn how to sail, and sail across the Pacific. okay? And he went viral. And I said to myself, wow, this guy had his own awakening. And he wanted to leave the corporate life and he wanted to sail across the ocean. I said, you know what? I bet you there's a lot of great stories of people having their own awakenings. And you know what? I'd like to tell it. So I did a bunch of research looking for guests, and I call it inspirational stories of transformation, meaning, and hope. And I've had people who have had awakenings and they've overcome bullying, loss, illness, near-death experiences. And I share those stories. So, yeah, it's like extending the brand. It gives me opportunity to sit in your shoes and interview people, and also stories that I think are important to be shared.
So, Danny, we're coming to the end of this thing here, and I always end every show the same way. I am a big believer that pain, suffering, loss, and all these things that people look at as negatives in life, I actually turn it around and I think they're more positives. And I believe suffering and pain are the greatest teachers that we could ever learn. So talking specifically about the pain and suffering that you went through, watching this man who was your hero decline in such a way and slowly losing pieces of him every single day. If you had to pick out a lesson from watching that happen, what do you think that lesson is? So what has your suffering taught you?
So you're right. It's harder on the family and caregivers than for the people going through it. So what I've learned throughout the suffering is to give yourself grace and to give yourself a break, to allow yourself to suffer and feel the pain, but not to overwhelm it, that it's okay. Sometimes you can't do anything. Sometimes you're going to watch a person suffer and there's nothing you can do to make it better. And sometimes the suffering is the flip side of the love you have for someone. So I'm a crier, and I never hide from crying. And when I went through a divorce, I cried in front of my children. I don't hide that. So I think it's okay to show your emotions, especially when you suffer. I don't think that's maybe the biggest lesson.
Seemed to work for your father.
Yeah, it did.
So, Danny, thank you so much for coming in. I really do appreciate you, and I can't wait to take a look at this book and give it a read. Hey,
Kevin, I really enjoyed the conversation very much, and I like the fact that we discussed a lot of other things.
Oh, of course.
Other than the book growing up. It's been very interesting, and it's something that I'm going to add to my podcast. You know what I do in my podcast, just quickly? I do like a bonus story. So after the main episode is over, I talk to the guest. I said, tell a story unrelated to your awakening that you want to share so people to get to know it. So I put that on my website I like that.
Yeah, something that's been going on since the beginning of the show.
That's great.
So that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, The Suffering of Awakenings with Danny Cohen. And let's think about all the stuff that we learned. You may not be there, but always put the word yet at the end. The next generation doesn't always have it easier. I can't even read my own handwriting sometimes. We are inevitably going to get old one day. Moments aren't around forever. But most importantly, and I mean most importantly, accept your loved ones, because they're not going to be here for eternity. And that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Clapper, OnlyFans. Follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson, and of course, follow the Suffering Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode.